is Ben Rochelle. I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I play the viola da gamba, baroque double bass, and violone. So a question I'm commonly asked is, what is a violone anyway? What is a viola da gamba? How is that different from a violone? Or what's the difference between a violone and a double bass? To explain briefly, I'll perhaps first introduce the viola da gamba. The viola da gamba is an instrument usually played in consorts of multiple sizes, treble through bass, or occasionally great bass. Here's a treble for comparison, and a bass viola da gamba, otherwise known as a bass viol. In the English-speaking world, has a flat back and frets, gut strings, and is tuned in fourths, D to D, or early 18th century French models often had a low A added. D, A, E, C, G, D, occasionally a low A. The bass viola da gamba is the truest ancestor of what we would now know today as the modern double bass, seen in modern orchestras. For reasons I will explain. So then, what is a violone? Literally translated, it means large viol, or more generally, a large bowed bass instrument. Historically, the term violone could have been used to refer to any number of instruments with anywhere between 3 and 6 strings, with or without frets, played with a variety of bow holds, played seated or standing. Perhaps my favorite is a violone in G. It looks like a large viola da gamba because it is. Flat back, gamba corners, 6 strings tuned in fourths with a third in the middle. G, D, An instrument of this nature makes an ideal continuo instrument for sacred and secular music throughout the 17th century, particularly in Germany, though they also saw some use in Italy and England. This particular instrument is a copy of an antique instrument from the early 1630s by German maker Ernst Busch. An instrument like this can blend very well with a small number of voices, sackbuts, recorders, violins, or indeed other viols. Its large range and versatility is quite useful in that regard. An important thing to mention about a violone tuned in G is that it's most often used to play at so-called 8-foot pitch. That is, what you see on the page is exactly the note you get. It is not in any way a transposing instrument. For reference, the 5th string is the same pitch as the bottom string of a cello, and indeed the slightly more versatile and louder cello did eventually take over this role through the early 18th century. And finally, for an example of a baroque double bass. Though for reasons I won't get into, it would more technically be correctly referred to as a contrabass, referring to its range rather than its function. However, the term double bass will suffice. This is a rather old instrument of unknown lineage that I have set up with gut strings. Notice it too has a flat back shape reflecting its ancestry in the viola da gamba family. And indeed, you could have an instrument this size with 6 strings or 5 strings tuned any number of ways, including exactly an octave below a bass viol. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, a wide variety of numbers and strings and tunings abounded. However, a reasonable compromise is 4 strings tuned in fourths, G, D, and my preference, though there is no hard and fast rule on this, is for the 4th string to be a low D. An instrument of this stature plays almost exclusively at 16-foot pitch, that is 1 octave lower than written, As such, it is a transposing instrument sounding one octave lower, and typically used to double the bass line provided by the cello section. As time went on, certainly by the middle of the 18th century, the 8-foot violone was more or less entirely replaced by the more familiar pairing of cello and double bass. The double bass went on to perhaps lose one or two of its strings and would shed its frets, though even today you will find around the world, in a variety of genres of music for that matter, both 4- and 5-string instruments with both flat and curved backs, though all tuned in fourths. Thanks for watching this brief tour of this fascinating world of historical bass instruments.